Good afternoon, everyone, thanks for joining us today afternoon. Today we have Amitabh Virmani, and he will be talking about quasi-normal modes from D1, D5 system. So I will now hand it over to Amitabh, and it will be up to him whether he would like to take questions at the end or in between. So Amitabh, it is all yours now.
Okay. So let me start by thanking Sumanto for this invitation. It's the first time I am giving any online talk like this. So uh, please excuse me if I things go wrong or something. Feel free to stop me for questions, comments. I have tried to make my talk quite simple, and I have not put so many equations so that many more people can understand what this subject is about and what kind of calculations people are doing right now. So the title is Quasi-normal modes of the D1 D5 system. This is work done in collaboration with Vidisha Chakrabarti, postdoc at ICTS, and Debodhiraman Ghosh. He is a student at CMM. Okay, so here is the outline of my talk. So I will start with the introduction and motivation. Okay, I don't know why this is not showing up, but then I will discuss the quasi-normal modes of the simplest first-law solutions. Then I will discuss my recent papers, and finally, well, as in the case of almost all black hole subjects, there is a debate about everything. So I will present some points of this debate and some modern developments. So this is the plan. Okay, feel free to stop me for questions, comments. Okay, so when we strike a string, guitar string, it produces polynomial modes, polynomial frequencies. So the real part of these frequencies is the music that we hear, and the fact that the music disappears with time corresponds to the imaginary part of the polynomial mode. Okay. Similarly, when we perturb a black hole, it produces complex frequencies. And the modes with definite frequencies are called the polynomial modes. So these are the polynomial modes. They have definite frequencies. Okay, and this is the topic that we are interested in. They were first discussed by Vishweshwara in 1970. Okay, so for this project, for this talk, we will study polynomial modes of a class of some exotic compact object, and these exotic compact objects, the ones that I am interested in, are called first balls. Okay. So let me go on. So more motivation. So compact objects probe extreme gravitational field. They are believed to be the key to the understanding of puzzles of black holes and more generally of fundamental physics. The standard paradigm for the compact objects is that of black holes, but alternatives have been suggested, and in particular, a host of exotic compact objects have been suggested. And gravitational wave observations can probe these differences. So one such class of exotic compact object is the class of first balls, and this is what I will be interested in this talk. For certain classes of first ball, very recently a detailed study of polynomial modes has been recently done, and this is the main topic of interest for this talk. So I will present some of these results. Okay, so to put things in context, so this study was started by these three authors, Eperon, Vial, and Santos, in 2016. So they initiated this study of polynomial modes of the simplest fuzzball, and they discovered a number of new effects. So a lot of new things they discovered. In particular, what will be very important for my talk, what they discovered is something called stable trapping of geodesics. And what they showed is that this stable trapping of geodesics corresponds to very slow decaying polynomial modes. So this is the main thing of interest. Uh, and these results have generated a lot of discussions and debates, and this is what I will focus on in the last part of the talk. So when I will tell you about the debates that people are doing on this topic. Okay, so my aim is to present an overview of these developments and a survey of the debates that has resulted from these papers. Okay. Okay, so any questions, comments on the introduction part? Are you able to hear me? Okay. Okay, I cannot hear anything back from you. Shall I continue?
Yes, Amitabh, you can continue.
Okay, okay, okay. So let me start with polynomial modes of the simplest fuzzballs. So let me first say a few things about the fuzzball proposal itself. So fuzzball proposal is a paradigm for black holes. Um, and it was proposed by Samir Mathur in 1997, and since then it has been pursued by a large number of people. In the conventional picture of the black hole, the region around the horizon is in the vacuum state, whereas in the fuzzball paradigm, string theory effects modify the interior of the black hole all the way to the horizon and Planck scale outside the horizon. So what we expect is in the fuzzball proposal, the interior of the black hole is different, the structure of the horizon is different, and the structure comes tiny bit outside the black hole horizon. And the proposal says that the radiation that leaves from these fuzzballs, so the Hawking radiation that leaves from these fuzzballs, can carry information just like the radiation from a piece of burning coal. So it carries radiation. So since the fuzzballs have structures at the horizon scale, the radiation that comes out carries information exactly as it carries information in the case of burning coal. Okay, so these are just words, but in the technical sense, the main emphasis of the program has been on the construction of the microscale geometries. So a lot of effort has gone into the construction of these microscale geometries, and most of these calculations are done in certain class of supergravity theories, in particular 6D supergravity theories. Okay, so a very big class of solutions discussed by Bina and Warner. So Bina and Warner, these are the two authors. They have discussed a very large class of microstate geometries. Microstate geometries refers to fuzzballs. Um, and they are solutions to 6D supergravity, but by dimensional reduction, one can describe them in 5D supergravity. So 5D and 6D description are complementary. Like in some situations, 5D description is useful, in some other description, 6D is useful. So in this slide, I will discuss the 5D, but often it is better to work with 6D. Okay, in our paper, we have worked with 6D, but in this talk, I will focus on 5D. 5D is tiny bit simpler. Okay. So in 5 dimensions, supergravity, there is a large class of supersymmetric solutions. And these solutions are asymptotically flat, as you would expect, because they represent microstates of a black hole. And like the black hole, they have partial T killing vector, which is time-like at infinity. These geometries are smooth and they are geodesically complete. And since partial T is the killing vector, they have a structure of time, the R direction here, and sigma is the spatial topology. And the spatial topology has non-trivial two cycles, non-trivial topologies. Like it has bubbles kind of things inside. So it's not just simply the structure of a black hole, but it has some bubbles inside. Okay. So because of this, they are not like completely trivial to work with. They have a lot of structure. Most of these solutions are rotating. In fact, non-rotating solutions are not known because of no-here theorem. And none of these solutions have horizons. So these are the fuzzballs. Okay. So the key thing to note is that fuzzball geometries, a very large class discussed by Bina Warner. Asymptotically, they are very much like black holes, but they are different from black holes in two important aspects. So they are geodesically complete, and they have bubbling features, no horizon, mostly rotating. This is the setup. Okay. So these geometries have very peculiar features, and one of the peculiar features was pointed out by Gibbons and Warner in 2005, and this is called evanescent ergosphere. Evanescent ergosphere. Okay, this is a bit of a funny name, but I will explain what this is. So what happens is that the killing vector partial T is time-like everywhere. So time-like everywhere, except at a surface where it becomes null. Except at a surface where it becomes null. The fact that the vector has to be causal, that is time-like or null, follows from supersymmetry. There is no other possibility. In the case of Kerr black hole, this is not true. In the case of Kerr black hole, partiality is time-like outside, but inside the ergo region, it becomes space-like. Okay, but such a thing cannot happen for a supersymmetric situation because supersymmetry requires that the square of the Killing spinor should always be causal. So partiality is time-like or null everywhere. And in this situation, what happens is that partiality is time-like everywhere except at a surface where it becomes null. So since it becomes null at this surface, there is an infinite redshift. Okay. So because of this infinite redshift, one can say that it has a structure similar to that of it has some feature related to the black hole. You can say it like this. Okay, but it's not really a black hole. The structure is very different, but because of this infinite redshift, one can say that it has some feature related to black hole. Okay, so this surface is an ergo surface, but it has no ergo region. It's ergo surface because the Killing vector becomes null, but it has no ergo region because the region surrounding is never space-like. So the region surrounding is always time-like. And the way this happens is the following. So the norm of the Killing vector V is becoming 0 at this surface, and the norm of the Killing vector is minimized here. It's minimized because if you take the covariant derivative of norm of the V square, it is 0 at this surface and only at this surface. Let me explain this a little bit more. Since minus of V square is either 0 or positive because the Killing vector is time-like or null, the place where it becomes 0 will be the place where it is minimized. So it is minimized at this ergo surface. Okay. So this ergo surface, the evanescent ergo surface, one can argue that they are ruled by zero energy null geodesics. Okay, this is the next argument. This is very similar to the argument that we teach in our general relativity courses that null surfaces are ruled by null geodesics. So, it's the same argument, but argument is a tiny bit more complicated. So consider such a surface and consider this combination. So this is geodesic along the vector V. Okay, so vector V is my direction, and I'm considering geodesic moving in the direction of V. So VB, flat V, VA, that kind of combination. Okay, so now since V is a Killing vector, I can change A and B. So I get a minus sign and this. And now since the VB and VB are contracted, so you see VB and VB are contracted, I write it as grad A acting on minus grad V square. But since just now I argued on the previous page that evanescent ergo surfaces are surfaces for which this quantity is minimized, so we have this equal to 0. Okay, so it follows that VA is a tangent to the geodesics. So VA. So this is the first sentence that evanescent ergo surface is ruled by null geodesics. Okay, this is what I have argued. So VA is tangent to the geodesic, which means that evanescent ergo surface is ruled by null geodesic. Okay. So now, in fact, it's a null geodesic. It's a null geodesic because V dot V is 0. V square is 0 at this surface. So, and in fact, it's a zero energy null geodesic because the Killing energy of the geodesic is P dot V. P is proportional to V. Momentum of the particle is proportional to its tangent. The tangent is in the direction of V. So V dot V. So we have energy, which is energy is proportional to minus V dot V, which is 0. Okay, so we have argued that evanescent ergo surface is a very special surface. It is ruled by null geodesic, and it is ruled by zero energy null geodesics. So ruled by zero energy null geodesics. So this is very, very peculiar. A time-like surface, ergo surface is a time-like surface, and it is ruled by null geodesics. And this is similar to the photon sphere of the Schwarzschild solution, except that in the Schwarzschild solution, the photon sphere is not ruled by zero energy. Okay, it is ruled by null geodesics, but not ruled by zero energy null geodesics. Okay, so let me remind you what the photon sphere is and few properties of the photon sphere. So a null geodesic on the photon sphere R equal to 3m of the Schwarzschild solution is trapped, but is trapped in an unstable way. it remains at r equal to 3m time-like surface forever. But the trapping is unstable because if we disturb these geodesics, then either these geodesics fall into the black hole or escape to infinity. Okay, and similar phenomena has been well studied for the Kerr black hole. And using geometrical optics approximation, one can determine real and imaginary part of the polynomial modes of Kerr black hole. And this has been very well studied. There is a very detailed paper in 2012 by these authors, and they have described this phenomena very well. Okay, so now for the first balls there is the evanescent ergosphere, which I call this curly S, this name curly S. And what I will argue is that they show a very different physics. They show stable trapping of geodesics, stable trapping of geodesics. So we have zero energy null geodesics on this ergo surface of the microsphere geometries, and these geodesics are stably trapped. They are stably trapped in the following sense: they have minimum energy, they have zero energy. They cannot fall further down because there is no place further down. This is the surface where the geometry ends, and they cannot come out because if they want to come out, it costs energy. So they cannot go in, they cannot come out. They are just trapped there, and they have the lowest possible energy, zero energy. So this is very, very peculiar. It does not happen typically. And if we use geometrical optics approximation here, then one can determine the real and the imaginary part of quasi-normal modes based on these geodesics. And we expect that the real part will be close to zero because the energy of the geodesics is zero. And the imaginary part is expected to be very small because the geometries, in these geometries, the geodesics are stably trapped. Because they are stably trapped, the perturbation doesn't want to decay. And since the energy of these geodesics is close to zero, we expect the real part to be close to zero. Okay, is this clear? Okay, so in particular, quasi-normal modes, we expect that quasi-normal modes will have very small real part and very close to zero real part and very small imaginary part. So this is what these three authors discussed, Eperon, Vial, and Santos. They calculated the quasi-normal modes of the simplest 2 and 3 charge microsphere geometries and show that in the geometrical optics limit, which is the larger limit, omega r is very small. Omega r does not scale with L, and omega r is close to zero. It does not scale with L. Omega I is very small. It goes as minus exponential minus 2 L log L. Okay. So what they showed is that there are quasi-normal modes which are very, very slow decaying, much slower than anything that was known before. So this was their main result. Okay. The same thing has been known for ultra-compact neutron star. They also have very slow decaying quasi-normal mode, but for the microstates, the decay is much slower. For these ultra-compact neutron stars, the decay is like exponential. So omega I is like minus e to the minus 2 beta L, where beta is some constant. But in this case, the decay is more slow. This is L log L. So in this case, the decay is more slow. Okay, so this is all I wanted to say about these papers, and now I will say a few things about our recent papers. Okay, so let me say a few things about my recent paper. So in the recent paper, we revisit the computation of quasi-normal modes. So we do again the computation of quasi-normal mode, but we do this in the decoupling limit. So this is near decoupling limit. This is the context in which we do. So we do this in the decoupling limit because this is the regime where the ADS CFT is expected to be valid. Okay, I say expected because there is some controversy about what is the ADS CFT duality for this setup. In the sense that some people say that it's not the D1 D5. I mean, okay, everybody agrees that it is some deformation of D1 D5 orbifold CFT. But whether the orbifold CFT description is valid or not, so there is some controversy about it. But I will not go into those controversies. My interest is in the near decoupling limit, where ADS CFT is expected to be valid, and when I use the CFT, I will use simply the D1 D5 orbifold CFT. So this is the context in which I am working. Okay. So with this qualification, I would like to say that the CFT description of the simplest supersymmetric first balls are very well understood, and also the scalar excitations are very well understood. So the question that we are interested in asking is, where are the slow polynomial modes? So we saw earlier that there are slow polynomial modes, and the question we are interested in, where are the slow polynomial mode in the dual CFT? This is the kind of question we were interested in, and we set up this calculation in the near decoupling region. Okay. So since we are doing near decoupling, we can use the matched asymptotic expansion, the standard techniques in polynomial modes. So what we do is that we study box phi equal to 0 in the matched asymptotic expansion. In the near region, we solve the near region is region near the, in the black hole case, it's the region near the horizon. In this case, it's the region near the structure of evanescent ergo surface. And in the near region, the solutions are hypergeometric functions. In the outer region, as in all flat space physics, the solutions are Bessel functions. So we just do careful matching between the inner region hypergeometric function and the outer region Bessel functions. And this matching gives the quasi-normal modes. So this is a standard technique done for many years for black holes, and we just apply this to the case of D1D5 system. Okay, so now one can also take the Eikonal limit in this. Eikonal limit is large L, so I will just write it as large L. And in this case, we expect the results to be matching with the results of Epron, Vial, and Santos, because they did their calculation in the larger limit. And indeed, we find that our results are perfectly consistent with the results of Epron, Vial, and Santos. Okay. So now let me say a few things about how all this works in the D1D5 CFT. So I have not presented the details here, but if you are interested in the details of these harmonic functions, hypergeometric and Bessel functions, you can look at our paper. Okay. So let me say a few things about how this works in the D1D5 CFT. So these authors, Avery, Chaudhary, and Mathur in 2008, they studied the following process. So D1D5 CFT is a CFT with the N1, N5 component strings. So each component string has a central charge 6. So these are the component strings. These circles that I have drawn, these big circles, like these ones, like for example, this one or this one, these are the component strings. Okay. So what they studied is the process in which, suppose two component strings are joined and they disentangle. So they disentangle into unjoined. So here the component strings are joined and here they are unjoined. Okay, so they are unjoined here, unjoined, and here they are joined. Okay, so what they study is the transition amplitude to go from these joined strings to unjoined strings. And this, they argued, corresponds to the emission of a scalar. So this is the emission of the scalar. Okay, so we just studied this process, and fortunately, this process gives the full quasi-normal mode spectrum. Just by doing this simple calculation, which was studied by these authors to begin with, this process gives the full quasi-normal mode spectrum. In particular, in the decoupling limit, we are able to faithfully capture all of Epron, Vial, Santos physics. There is indeed low energy modes which corresponds to zero energy geodesics with large L. And in the next slide, I will say how to compute the imaginary part of the quasi-normal mode. So, okay, so let me first stop here to ask if people have question about the real part of the frequencies. So just by doing this calculation, we are able to reproduce the real part of the frequencies. And in particular, we are able to recover this Epron, Vial, Santos physics, who argue that real part of the frequencies go as order 1 as L becomes large. And we are able to find these modes from this simple calculation. So I will stop for 1 minute and ask if there are questions at this point.
Hi, Amitabh.
Hello, I can hear you.
Hi, Amitabh. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So the question I had is that when you talk about scalar emission, this is not quite emission from a horizon, because this isn't a black hole, right?
Yeah, this is not a black hole. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was asking, is that corresponding to this emission from this fuzzball surface, is there a gray body factor?
Um, uh, this okay. The spectrum.
Sorry,
don't
I
know.
can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Okay, I don't know how to answer this question. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so I don't know how to answer this question because in the gray body factor case, what happens is that there is a thermal distribution of spectrum that you see at infinity, and then it is modulated by a factor which depends on the details of the black hole, the potential that the Hawking quanta travels.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, but in this case, there is no thermal part of the spectrum. It is just this emission, and this emission itself has certain spectrum. So one can talk about the profile of this emission and things like those. But I'm not sure how one can disentangle this from. I'm not sure how which part one can say that which part is gray body factor, which part is the thermal part. So that distinction is very difficult.
Okay, okay. Fine, fine. Carry on, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for the question. So now I will talk about the imaginary part of the spectrum. So imaginary part. Um, and the aim is that quasi-normal mode imaginary part of spectrum we want to reproduce from the D1 CFT. That is this is the calculation we are interested in. Okay. So there is some physics here. So typically in ADS CFT we compute correlation functions in the CFT. So we compute correlation functions in the CFT and we compare them with the quantities in the ADS geometry. This is the typical calculations. However, our setup is different. This setup is different. Here we have three charge microstate geometries, some microstate geometry, some fuzzball that has an inner ADS region, but it is glued to an asymptotically flat region. So there is a physics of asymptotically flat spacetime. This is what is important for us. So the quasi-normal modes are determined by outgoing boundary conditions which are like taking the radiation out. So boundary conditions in which the scalar field is going to the asymptotically flat region. Therefore, we are interested in the emission of the scalar quanta, leading to infinity of the asymptotically flat region. So this is slightly different from what typically we do in ADS-CFT. In ADS-CFT, we are interested in calculations in ADS, but here we are interested in calculations where the perturbation is leaking to flat space. Okay, so this requires coupling of CFT to flat space modes. And this may sound a little complicated, but it is not so complicated. Fortunately, this physics was worked out by Avery Chaudhary and Mathur in 2008. Actually, it was done in PhD thesis of Steve Avery and Varun Chaudhary. The two PhD theses worked this out carefully. So, unfortunately, I cannot describe the whole thesis in this talk, but I will just give you a flavor of what this is about. So these three authors gave a formula for the emission rate, and the formula was that the imaginary part of emission is negative minus sign here, and there were some of these factors and some dynamic phase space factors if you wish. But what is important is this thing. So if you go from initial state to final state in the CFT through certain vertex operator, all you have to calculate is this factor. If you calculate this factor, you can substitute this into this formula, and this will give you the imaginary part of the quasi-normal mode. So this is what we did. So computation of transition amplitude for the above process is what was required. And once you calculate this, take the large R limit. This precisely gives the Éperon-Vial-Seinfeld result in the decoupling limit. So this is the only calculation we had to do. We did not have to discover this full physics of coupling CFT modes to flat space modes and things like this. Okay.
So, Amitabh, I have
So
a question if I can interrupt.
yeah, yeah.
So what are the boundary conditions at the horizon that you're assuming for?
So yeah, there is no horizon. So the boundary condition in the interior is that, so the picture is something like this. Let me draw. So the first ball is something like this. Uh, is something like this. So this is the flat space region,
Mhm.
and this is the inner ADS region. Okay, and the matching happens in this region. So this is the, let me try to change the color. So the matching happens in this region.
So that is like the
Okay,
throat
so
region, right?
yeah, in between the two regions. So here we impose boundary condition that the wave function should be smooth at this point. So smoothness at the inner boundary. And here we impose the boundary condition that the wave function should be outgoing at this point. So this gives Bessel functions, this gives hypergeometric functions to F1, and we just match hypergeometric functions to some J mu R whatever. And this matching gives the quasi-normal.
So you're also not assuming any boundary condition at the ATS boundary, because usually you would assume a Dirichlet boundary condition and then you would compute the modes leakage and basically
Okay.
match it
So
with
I
the flow.
understand. Yeah. If you impose, okay. So I have to go back. Uh, so this part. So I
Mhm.
said that I will work in the near decoupling limit. So if I work in the strict decoupling limit, then this will happen exactly what you
Okay.
are saying. Then I have to worry about the boundary conditions at the ADS region. But that is not what I am interested in. I am
Mhm.
interested in a near decoupling limit. So what I want to allow is that ADS modes are coupled to flat space mode, but the coupling is weak.
Okay.
So the perturbation goes from ADS region, then goes to the boundary of ADS, and then slowly leaks out. So
Okay.
this is the setup that we are interested in.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Said differently, like with these technical point. So with these two F1 modes, if you do the expansion of these modes near the boundary, near the ADS boundary in this region, you will see both the normalizable ADS3 modes and non-normalizable ADS3 mode. And what is happening is that non-normalizable ADS3 mode is slowly leaking to flat space. This is the physics. Okay. Okay. So
Hi, Amitabh, can I ask a question?
yes, please.
So when you look at this matrix elements, your I and F, initial and final states, differ by some scalar bosons, right?
Uh, in the bulk physics, they differ by scalar bosons. In the
Yeah.
CFT, this is the process. So some component strings were joined and they unjoined. So this is the process in the CFT.
Yeah, but my question is, suppose you took both I and F to be supersymmetric states, then you could also have fermion emission accompanying scalar emission. And you should get the amplitude for free, wouldn't you, by supersymmetry?
Yeah. Okay. Actually, this is some calculation we have thought about, but we have not done a calculation of this type. There are two reasons for this. Perhaps it is true, although it's not clear to us, whether such a fermion is minimally coupled in the bulk. So that statement is not clear to us. For the scalar, the supergravity analysis is quite simple, and one can argue that a minimally coupled scalar corresponds to a process of this type. But for a fermion, indeed, one can come up with a process of this type. But whether one can go back and can confirm that that the fermion is minimally coupled, that is, and perhaps that statement is true. It's not clear to us.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So thank you very much for the questions. So summary so far. So Epron, Vial, and Santos in 2016 pointed out several important physics point about quasi-normal modes. All these interesting details that they pointed out, they can be captured in the near decoupling analysis. And this is the paper that we did. And using certain results of Every, Chaudhary, and Mathur from 2008, we are also able to recover both the real and imaginary part of the quasi-normal mode spectrum. Okay, and all the modes that we find are stable, so we don't find any unstable mode. And it is for the first time in the physics literature that people are able to recover stable modes using a CFT analysis. Earlier, people have worked out unstable mode from the CFT analysis, but I believe in our paper we were the first sort of authors who looked at stable quasi-normal modes from a CFT analysis. Okay, so now the last part of my talk, the last 10 minutes or so, I will tell you something about the debates in this subject and some modern development. Okay. So, as I said, with black holes, any paper you write, there is a debate about everything. So, with the quasi-normal modes, also there is a debate. So, Epron, Real, and Santos, they said that because there is a stable trapping, and this stable trapping is a local effect, it only happens at the evanescent atmosphere, it perhaps leads to an instability. And instability is like tiny formation of black holes, very much like the instability in ADS. So what they argued is that since there are very slowly decaying modes, these modes are trapped near the evanescent ergosphere. And since these modes are trapped, no matter what you do, they will never come out. So a perturbation trapped there will eventually lead to a formation of a tiny black hole in ADS3, and very similar to the ADS instability. Okay. Well, within weeks, these three authors, Morov, Michel, and Poom, they argued that this is not the case. They argued that although this stable trapping is a local effect, so they agreed to this point. But since we are in string theory, they said that the alpha prime corrections will become important. And alpha prime corrections, what they will do is that they will change fuzzballs into another fuzzball. Fuzzballs will remain fuzzball, but they will be corrected by alpha prime. Okay. And what it means is that the new fuzzballs will have some alpha prime related features. They also argued that the instability can be anticipated from the discussion of entropy enhancement, in the sense that you can go from a less typical fuzzball to a more typical fuzzball. You can go from a less entropic situation to a more entropic situation. So they argued that one can anticipate such an instability from a entropy enhancement. Okay. Bina Warner from 2016 to 2019, they studied these questions in more detail. And what they do is that they find more detailed fuzzball solutions that have structure near the evanescent ergo surface. So they find more detailed fuzzballs which are potential endpoints of such an instability. Although the instability as such, dynamical aspect of the instability is not understood, but possible endpoints of such an instability. And what they argue is that the stable trapping is a feature of the fuzzball. They argue that it's a feature of fuzzball rather than a bug. Okay. Well, the debate doesn't end. There are other people who have made comments in private communication. They say that the detailed classical properties of black hole need not emerge from fuzzball, so one should not worry about these effects. Okay. So to say the very least, all this is very, very confusing. What is the correct physics? Where is this debate going? And so, in the last 4 years, more papers have come out. But I would say that, I mean, this is a bit pessimistic, but I would say that there is no real progress on the gravity side of the debate. I think gravity side of the debate remains as it is. There are slowly decaying quasi-normal modes, and the slowly decaying quasi-normal modes lead to a certain kind of instability. I think this is what people will agree on. On the CFT side, there is a hope that one can do more calculations, but as of now, our results are the best so far. We are able to reproduce the full quasi-normal mode spectrum from the CFT side, and this is where the status of the subject is. Okay, so now we have some comments about this. So this is speculative comments. So the fact that we are able to reproduce all details of the quasi-normal modes gives us some credibility in proposing the gravity dual. So some credibility in proposing the gravity dual. This is a fancy way of saying that we are just bullshitting. We don't know the real answer. So we believe that as soon as we put a scalar excitation, we change one fuzzball to another. This is very similar to what Marolf and Michel were saying. Since the new fuzzball is of slightly higher energy, there is a small decay probability to the lower energy fuzzball. But this process cannot be captured in linear analysis. The scalar field analysis simply tells that something of this type is happening, but in order to find the back-reacted solution, one has to go beyond. And the CFT analysis is telling is that there is a back-reacted solution which does this. So what we have argued in our paper is that linear fields on microstate geometries is not the correct Fuzball physics. As soon as you put the scalar, nonlinear modes are excited, and one should take nonlinear reactions, nonlinear effects into account. So, in some sense, this is similar to what Marolf Michel are saying. But this alpha prime effect is not what we are after. We are after like more fields or more classes of solutions. Okay. So now let me tell you about more recent updates, some more recent papers. So very recently, just a few days ago, in fact, Bina, Epron, Heidemann, and Warner did a detailed analysis of a different class of fuzzballs, and these fuzzballs are called superstrata. So in the remaining few minutes, I will explain what is superstrata. This is my aim, and a few key points of their analysis. The paper they have written is very long; it's about 70-80 pages. So I will just explain few key points. Okay, I must say that this might be of interest of people in Kolkata. A wormhole model of such a system is also under study, and this is being pursued by the group in Leuven. Actually, they promised me that the paper will come out last week, but I think they are delayed. So the paper should come out in a couple of days. Okay, so let me say a few things about superstrata, and I will say this in a very simple way. So this is for pedestrian, and I will only say this in words. I will not use any equations. So superstrata are the most complicated. I really want to emphasize the most complicated solutions known to humankind since the advent of general relativity. They are the most general microstate geometries whose CFT duals are identified. So we know the CFT description of these geometries to a large extent. The way these solutions are constructed, they are constructed using linear structure of BPS equation. Many of you might know that when you look at the BPS equations, then the equations become sequentially linear. That is to say, you solve first equation, then you use solution of that equation in the next equation, use the solution of the above two equations in the third equation, and so on. So you get a sequentially linear structure, and these solutions are constructed using such a linear structure of the BPS equations. The number of superstrata constructed so far is not enough to account for the black hole entropy. So what one can try to do is to do some sort of geometric quantization of these superstrata, and this has been tried, and the answer that one finds is not enough to account for the entropy of black holes, but it offers valuable insight into the physics of black holes. Okay, so in this paper, Bena, Warner, Heidemann, and Epron, they studied quasi-normal modes for a class of superstrata using WKB methods, and they described quasi-normal modes. So very broadly speaking, I emphasize the word broadly speaking, the results are similar to our analysis, except there are two main differences. The two main differences are happening because they are working with superstrata, whereas we were working with the simpler fuzzballs. So the first difference is that in this solution, there is a parameter which controls the depth of the throat. The solutions, so let me draw a picture here. So if you wish, our work versus theirs. So our work is like looking at a situation like this. So we have flat space region grouped to ADS region like this. But what they have is that they have a much deeper throat. So which is more like a black hole. So what we have is sort of this region and this region. We don't have this region. So we don't have not in our work. Okay. Yeah. So this is the part that is new in their work. So in their solution, they have this depth of the throat parameter, which is one of the most important physics parameters that they have. And this parameter controls the energy gap of the excitation on top of the supersymmetric CFT state dual to the superstratogeometry. So in our project, we find that the mass gap is 1 over Ry. Ry is the size of the S1 where these D1 and D5 rings are. But in their analysis, because they are working with such a more difficult solution, they find 1 over N1 and 5 Ry. So D1 and D5 branes are wrapping the Ry circle, and our answer is 1 over Ry, their answer is 1 over N1 and 5 Ry. So this answer is much closer to the actual more complicated microstates.
So Amitabh, I have a question in this regard.
Yeah.
So this gap you're talking about 1 by Ry, so this is effectively the size of the boundary or the circle on which your D1, D5 or full CFT is living, right?
Yes.
And
If you look at, yeah, exactly. This is the size of the, yeah.
so shouldn't the real part of the quasi-normal mode depend on this, or rather it should scale along with this, right? I mean, I would expect it would be some
exactly.
integer multiple of this.
Yeah. So exactly what you said. So our quasi-normal mode spectrum has this gap, which is 1 over Ry. And as you say, indeed, since the modes are quantized on the Ry circle, we expect that the gap will be like this. Okay, but this is a bit too naive. The reason is that the D1, D5 CFT has something called fractionated states. So this is why these component strings picture are there. So when are these so what happens is that each of these component strings are of size R, but the way D1, D5 CFT works is like this. So when all these component strings combine, the effective size becomes N1, N5 times R.
So it's like the long string, short string picture.
Yeah. Long string versus short string. Okay. So we see the physics of the short string because we are working with a simpler fuzzball. They see the physics of the long string because they are working with the more complicated fuzzballs. So
Okay.
this is the. Okay. Thank you for these questions. Okay. And finally, they also have modes which explore the throat. Because in our project, we don't have a throat, so we don't have modes which explore the throats. In their project, they have throat as well as more complicated spectrum, so they have modes which explore the throat and the analog of which we don't have in our setup. Okay, so this is the state of the art. In my opinion, they don't have much to say about the ERS debate, but they offer a somewhat refined perspective on the ERS debate. They argue that the supergravity analysis itself is no longer valid in the larger limit, and this is the case where the ERS were most interested in. So they argue that the ERS cannot take the larger limit for a general fuzzball. Okay. So as a result, they argue that fuzzballs are much closer to ultra-compact neutron star in that there is an upper bound on the value of L. And as a result, the imaginary part of the quasi-normal mode does not go to power minus 2L log L, but e power minus 2L. Well, this is debatable. One can argue whether it is correct or not, but this is debatable. Okay, so only time will tell whether they are correct or not, whether fuzzballs are different from neutron stars or they are like neutron stars. We don't know. More study is required, and perhaps the most important thing right now is to understand the CFT description of these Ebron Bena-Warner study. So if we do that, then there will be real progress. So with this, I will stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Amitav, for such a nice talk. So it's now open to all the participants for questions.
Can I ask a question, Amitabh?
Please.
Yeah, very nice presentation. I actually have two questions, if you don't mind. The first one is sort of a follow-up to what I was saying before, namely fermionic emission, you see, can also be obtained by simply doing on the states by using supersymmetry ward identities. You know, in the early days when Sumit Das and Samir Mathur were doing these calculations, we wrote a paper which has not been published yet, where we made this idea, we sort of proposed this idea. And the reason it didn't get published is because we were not able to complete it. how on both sides you can use supersymmetry maximally to relate both scalar and fermion emission. So that's just a comment. The other comment I had is about what you were saying at the beginning, and there was a problem with the transmission, so I lost some of the things you were saying. This is about this stable trapping of null geodesics. Now, if you're working with exact Reisner-Nordstrom black holes in 4 dimensions or exact extremal black holes, so it's exact extremality, not near extremality that I'm talking about, then you do have this kind of trapping. You have geodesics which are basically zero energy, but they live on the horizon. We had a paper on this, and this is sort of known. So I was wondering whether people had looked at quasi-normal modes corresponding to those.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for these comments. I have something to say about both of them.
Yeah.
So let me say about.
Can you mute the microphone, because otherwise there is some echo kind of.
Sorry, I can't hear you, Amitabh.
I'm saying that, can you mute the microphone? Otherwise there is some echo, Professor Majumdar.
So I'll shut off the. Yeah. Okay.
Microphone. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you for these questions. I have something to say about both these points. So let me say about the second point first, because that is something I have thought about and I am familiar with your paper. So what happens is that in the extremal limit, let us think about the Green function, retarded Green function in the black hole background, and we ask the question, where are the quasi-normal modes in the retarded Green function? So as is well known, these are the poles of the retarded Green function. Now, one takes the extremal limit. What has been recently very well understood is that many of these poles, they converge into a branch cut. And the interpretation of this branch cut is precisely the kind of geodesics you are talking about. So there was a paper in BTC black hole where people have studied stable trapping of geodesics at the horizon, exactly of the type that you are talking about, and they have tried to make precise this connection between branch cut of the Green function and the stable trapping of geodesics near the horizon. So this is a paper by Sam Gala from last year for BTC black hole. Now about the first point. On the CFT side, I am very sure that the calculation can be done. In fact, on the CFT side, the calculations are a bit easier than the scalar emission that we have studied. But on the gravity side, the situation is not clear to me. We thought about it, but we are not very sure whether the supersymmetric transformation of the scalar corresponds to a free fermion on the bulk side. So this is where we are confused.
You see that on the supergravity side, that is where the supersymmetric ward identities, which are known, can help you. You see, because you have these matrix elements for scalar emission, and the supersymmetry ward identity would connect those matrix elements with the fermionic emission matrix elements. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. What is not clear to me is the super. I mean, we thought about this question. We don't have a precise clarity on this. So indeed, what you are saying can be done. We tried doing it, but we don't have a clarity. So let me just put it this way.
Okay, thanks, Amitabh. Thanks very much.
Sorry, can I ask you? Are you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, thank you for a very interesting and actual talk. And I would like to ask about the following. You have said from the very beginning that your theory is connected with gravitational waves, as I understood. So I would like to ask you about the following. As we know, we have seen gravitational waves from firstly from black holes, and later from neutrons, from stars. Yes, and. Then you regarded string theory as the limit of high energy physics approach of this picture. And now the question is connected with the gravitational waves properties, because we know about the huge amount of experimental experiments which are connected with the necessity of studying of the observables of gravitational waves which are connected with Big Bang and with polarization of relictic emission. So what can you say about maybe different observables of these gravitational waves and of your KFT, CFT correspondence? Maybe something you can say about it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, let me say a few things. So right now, the first ball proposal is not as developed as one would like it to be. So we don't know what are the first ball states for a realistic black hole. We don't have an answer to that question. I think what we are doing right now is just as a matter of principle. Can we study quasi-normal modes of the simplest first balls that are known? And this is where the status of the field is right now. And only in the last 2-3 years, people are able to get an understanding of what these quasi-normal modes are, how they are different from the black holes. And this recent paper that is about to come out on this one-hole model of the Lewin group, they attempt to make some connection to gravitational wave physics. This is all that I can say. The subject is still in its infancy to make a concrete statement about gravitational wave observations.
Yes, thank you.
So,
Amitav, there is one question. So, can you suggest some reference or give some information about the 6D case, because you discussed mostly on 5D?
Oh, no. Actually, I must say that all the calculations are done in 6D. All the papers that I referred to, they are done in 6D. But just to present the talk, I try to do things in 5D, because in 5D the picture is slightly simpler. But in practice, all the calculations are done in 6D. I mean, just to give you a formula, for example, like this Ry is the size of the sixth dimension, or like this formula that I wrote about the lambda. Yeah, this lambda, for example, this lambda is the momentum mode in the sixth dimension. So all the calculations are done in sixth dimension. It's just for the presentation of the physical aspect, I chose to do it in 5D because it's slightly simpler.
Okay, so I hope this answers the question. I mean, okay,
Yeah.
are there any other?
so I have a couple of questions. So, so firstly, so in the context of ADS-CFT, usually you would say that if there is a presence of a horizon, then you would have this kind of mode decays. Like precisely, you would have the imaginary part as non-zero. But for example, for thermal ADS-3, it's just oscillatory, right? You just have the real part. But over here in this context, so you're saying that you basically have a imaginary part. So is my guess is it related to the the near decoupling limit? I mean, because there's a mode leakage, that's why you have this imaginary part. Or to frame my question correctly, I would, the thing is, so why do you have imaginary part over here in a horizonless geometry?
Yeah. So there are two aspects of the question. Actually, the first aspect is the BTC black hole case. So the BTC black hole has imaginary part, and that corresponds to simply the fact that the perturbation is going behind the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the standard ADS-CFT physics. In this case, if you take the strict decoupling limit, then certainly you don't have the imaginary part.
Okay.
In fact, one can see this from this equation. Strict decoupling limit corresponds to taking R going to infinity. R is the size of the sixth dimension, if you wish,
Mm-hmm.
and this is the place where the ADS-3 boundary is. So in the strict decoupling limit, what happens is that the R goes to infinity and then all these things become zero. So the imaginary part becomes zero.
Okay.
And this is precisely what you said. There is no horizon and there is no leakage. So we expect only the real part of the spectrum. And this is what we are seeing. But when you allow for small leakage, there is a small leakage, and we wanted to calculate the rate at which the leakage happens.
So is there any like bound on what this R is, or is there any? I mean, so
No, I don't think there is any. Like the solutions are known for any value of R. Only when R is large compared to the Planck length, we have an ADS region. And once we have the ADS region, we can use D1, D5 CFT in a reliable way.
okay. So it's not like generally for ADS3 like you would relate the winding number with n5 and then say that if in the n going to infinite limit, I mean that's how like you can recover the classical limit.
That is the larger limit of the CFT. The question is more like what should be the lowest line excitation, and whether that excitation decouples from the flat space mode or not. So
Okay.
it's more like the very early days of ADS CFT physics, where when the decoupling limit happens, how the decoupling limit happens. So what we want to do is that we want a near decoupling limit where there is leakage from ADS region to flat space, but at the same time ADS CFT is valid.
Okay. Okay, so I have another question. So at some point you were mentioning about the length of the throat in
Yeah.
context of the first one. So on the CFT side, what does this correspond to? Because I mean, usually like in ADS CFT, if you're talking about some kind of wormhole throat, usually it's related to some kind of non-perturbative effect or some kind of like deformation to the CFT. So is there any like particular parameter in the CFT or particular aspect of the CFT that captures like the length of or
Yeah.
the depth of the
So
throat?
yeah. So the aspect that is captured is the winding of the component string. So in the case of our work, the CFT picture is just singly wound component string, N1, N5 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in these geometries, there are like multi-wound strings like this.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are like N1, N5 over K of them, where K is the winding of these ones. So since there are multi-wound string in this case, there is a longer throat, and one is able to see different physics, which is one is able to see this physics, whereas we are able to see only this physics.
So the final thing in this regard would be, so is it possible to write some kind of effective metric for like this kind of like some kind of near horizon effective metric for these geometries?
Yeah. So this is how all these geometries are written. So if you look at any of the superstrata papers, they write what do you call like metric in this region of the geometry, and this is precisely ADS 3 times S3. Then they write metric in this region of the geometry, which is ADS 2 times S1 times S3,
Okay,
and
so
then they write metric in this region, which is flat space.
okay.
Yeah. And I mean,
Okay,
and then the main art is to glue all these things, and the main progress that these authors have made is that they are able to glue all these regions. So they glue ADS 3 times S3 to ADS 2 times S1 times S3 to flat space.
Okay. Thank you.
are there any other questions? Okay, so if there are no further questions, let us thank Amitav once again for such a nice talk. So thank you, Amitav, and
Thank you.
and next week we will have our seminar on Wednesday rather than on Tuesday. I will